Riot Games, the creators of League of Legends, don't tend to talk about numbers too much anymore, but last time they did, back in January of 2014, they told us that 67 million people were playing their game each month. 67 million. That, by the way, was about 2.5 million more people than were thought to be living in the United Kingdom at about the same time. This game is no joke. But you're probably thinking, if Riot have now stopped talking about active players, that's probably because fewer people are playing today than in 2014, and they'd rather we didn't know that. Well, that's something I asked Greg Street, the lead game designer for League of Legends, back when I visited Riot Games earlier in the year. Here is his response.
Yeah, it's substantially more than that now, but I think we kind of stopped talking about the numbers because it's very easy to just focus on that as a metric of success for the game.
I would love to know what substantially means in that context, but yes, League of Legends is a big game, perhaps even the biggest game there is if we go by the number of players logging in each month. Now that, of course, ends up being quite a difficult claim to prove, as so many video game publishers, and that now includes Riot themselves, prefer to keep these sorts of figures behind closed doors, perhaps to avoid the very sort of comparison I'm going to make right now. Let's look at Dota 2, an obvious choice if we're after a direct competitor to League of Legends. According to Steam Charts, a third-party site that tracks the number of people playing Steam games at the same time, Dota 2 has so far, at its very peak, attracted a total of almost 1.3 million players. Alright, how about a game that isn't from the same genre, but is inarguably gigantic as well? I'm talking about Minecraft. Now, Minecraft probably sees numbers like those we just mentioned for Dota 2 quite regularly if we go by this tweet from Mojang developer Nathan Adams at the start of last year. This suggests that a spike of 1.4 million people playing at the same time isn't much of a rarity for Minecraft, and to be fair, these figures can't be accounting for those that are either playing offline or, I imagine, those playing with a less than reputable copy of the game. So how does League of Legends compare to that? We're talking about Dota 2 and Minecraft here. You don't get much bigger than Dota 2 and Minecraft. Except maybe you do. If we go back to the numbers released by Riot Games back in early 2014, they claim to be seeing, and I quote, over 7.5 million playing at the same time during each day's peak playtime. If that is indeed the case, and let me be clear, I think we can all spot a possible incentive for Riot to have been a little generous with their own player counts, but if they're even close to that, they are so far ahead of the competition that it's mind-blowing. So now let's ask a really tough question. Why? Why is that the case? Why is League of Legends the biggest game in the world? How have they managed to, even within the MOBA genre itself, fend off the likes of Valve and Blizzard? Those guys don't mess around. Why is it League of Legends? Why is it Riot Games at the very top of that pile? Let's give it a go. Okay, for a start, they were first. That isn't meant to devalue all of the incredible work that goes into this game on a daily basis, but it is a big factor. Inspired, as almost every MOBA has been, by the Warcraft 3 mod Defense of the Ancients, Brendan Beck and Mark Merrill founded Riot Games in 2006, making two very important hires over the next couple of years. Those hires would be Steve Feek, known as Guinzu. He wasn't the creator of the original mod, but when it eventually stopped being updated, he would go on to lead the development of Dota All-Stars, by far the most popular take on the Defense of the Ancients formula. There really are only a handful of people that can rightly be referred to as the authors of the original Dota mod that inspired this entire genre, and Steve Feek is absolutely one of them. The other hire they would make early on was Steve Meskin, known as Pendragon. Now he was the creator of DotaAllStars.com, which had been serving as the central hub for what had then become a very substantial Dota community. Over 1 million users every month, according to an interview with Meskin in 2009. So when the game does finally launch, also in 2009, they have a game designer that had for a time been the guy behind the mod that started this whole thing, and they've got someone that clearly understands how important it will be for League of Legends to attract not just players, but a community of players. And you know what else Riot Games had in 2009? Very little competition. In fact, aside from Dota All-Stars and a closed beta for Heroes of Newerth, the next biggest contender in the MOBA genre that had actually been released was called Demigod from Gas-Powered Games. Now you might know Gas-Powered Games as the developers behind Dungeon Siege and Supreme Commander. Yeah. Now, unlike League, Demigod couldn't claim to come from the minds behind Dota All-Stars, it wasn't free to play, and it really didn't have a smooth launch. Which means on the 27th of October 2009, League of Legends would emerge as the first true successor to Dota All-Stars. And it's not just doing that in North America and Europe, it's also doing that in China. Dota All-Stars, it's worth knowing, had a huge following in China. As pointed out by this press release from 2008, back when League of Legends still had the adorable subtitle Clash of Fates, the deal, and they're talking about partnering with Chinese powerhouse Tencent here, is one of only a handful of partnerships to bring a US-developed online game direct to China. Tencent, by the way, is now considered to be one of the largest tech companies in the world and operates amongst many other services an instant messenger called QQ, which has something like 800 million active accounts. If you wanted to get your American-made game into China, these are the people that you wanted on your side, and Riot Games were partnered with them from day one. In fact, that relationship has only continued to evolve over the last 7 years. Just a few months ago, Tencent completed their acquisition of Riot Games after owning a majority stake in the company since 2011. Why does that matter? Well, according to a recent interview with Fortune, the games market research firm Newzoo, which specializes in esports, claimed that just over half of the League of Legends player base comes from China alone. That's got to be a lot easier to manage if a major player from the Chinese internet business has a real stake in your success. So to recap, League of Legends was the first game to really follow on from the success of that original Dota mod. They hired people straight from its community, and they didn't just launch in North America and Europe, but Asia as well. Now, if we go on to look at the timeline of MOBA releases, the next game to launch would be Heroes of Newerth, which wouldn't be released until mid-2010 and importantly wouldn't go free to play until about mid-2011. That's about the same time that Dota 2 begins its beta testing. Now, Dota 2 was and still is the next biggest contender to the MOBA throne. It comes from Valve and has another big name from the glory days of the original Dota mod, the mysteriously anonymous IceFrog. And yet Dota 2 still didn't see its official launch until July of 2013, which is almost 4 years after the release of League of Legends. In 2014, we'd see Smite, which gave the MOBA genre an interesting third-person twist, and then Blizzard were really pretty late to the party, releasing Heroes of the Storm in June of 2015. And the thing worth knowing about the MOBA genre when we're looking at these release dates is that it creates incredibly loyal fans. If you ask an experienced League player how long it took them to get good at the game, to really understand it, they'll likely tell you they're still not really good at the game and they still don't really understand it. But eventually they may suggest it took somewhere within the hundreds of hours to get a real feel for it. And that's understandable. At the time of recording this video, League of Legends has a roster of almost 130 unique champions. Sure, they all tend to fit into a few quite specific roles, and you can see the similarities amongst them, but they all do play differently. It does, and it must take hundreds of hours for players to learn all those individual quirks and how to play both with and against them. So if you do commit to that process, if you do invest that much time with a single game and its community, then it's going to take quite a lot to convince you to jump ships and start playing a new MOBA from scratch. So yes, I think Riot Games benefited tremendously from being first out the gate. Sorry, Demigod, not really counting you here. But that being said, keeping hold of that player base, ensuring that League of Legends players don't feel the need to check out the competition, well, that actually requires an awful lot of work. I think one of the largest misconceptions regarding League of Legends is that it's quite a static game. Even with almost 130 champions, how many variations of Summoner's Rift can you play before you've really seen all there is to see? Actually, that would be a pretty colossal number of different team compositions, but that's not actually the point I'm trying to make here. Because League of Legends isn't a complete game, arguably it never will be, it never can be. Just like the original Dota mod, which required people like Steve Feek and IceFrog to keep it moving forwards, this game is always changing, always reacting to its own players. On average, League of Legends is patched once every couple of weeks. These patches will usually add a few new champion skins or summoner icons, that kind of thing, but predominantly they're all about balance. You'll often hear players talk about a metagame, which in very basic terms is whatever the League of Legends community currently believes is the best way to play the game. That can be what champions to play, what items to purchase, that sort of thing. This evolving metagame often stems from pro players who discover something new which is then emulated by the community at large. Now Riot's job in all of that is to keep things in check. It's actually not in their best interest to let just a handful of champions or item builds dominate every game because that becomes boring to play and to watch. They want League of Legends to stay fresh and to stay interesting, so that its players keep coming back because it doesn't feel the same as it did just a few weeks ago. You've also got champions typically being introduced to the game every 2 to 3 months. I was actually at the Riot headquarters on the day that Jhin, the most recent champion, was officially announced, and it's genuinely exciting to watch the player response as it happens. How does he work? What do you mean you can't improve his attack speed? Seeing the community explode with questions and speculation is a big part of playing a game like this. And then on top of that, League of Legends is a game that's split into seasons. This gives its competitive scene a clear time frame to work within, but it's also now expected that with each new season will come big fundamental changes to the way in which the game works. For example, between the end of the 2015 season and the beginning of this year's season, we've seen a complete overhaul of how marksman champions play, as well as new options when it comes to the items you buy at the start of a game, and the way in which you and your team make sure you can see what's going on around the map. Those aren't insignificant tweaks. And throughout the rest of the year, League of Legends will see a brand new client. It'll change how you select the champion you want to play. Its ranking system will be reworked, and there'll be loot. I think this game started big because it was first. I do, but I think it stayed big because Riot Games keep on making these kind of adjustments. Now, don't get me wrong, the community doesn't always think these changes are perfect, and I think it's very fair to say they would prefer if some of them happened a little bit more quickly, but every 2 weeks there are patch notes to catch up on. Every 2 to 3 months there's a new champion to play around with, and every year is defined by these big feature changes. League of Legends doesn't stand still, but to achieve that goal you need a lot of people working for you. Although Riot Games has now been acquired by Tencent, their main headquarters remains in Los Angeles, and I spent a couple of days there at the start of the year just to see what it's like working on the biggest game in the world. And for a start, I don't know if this is even common knowledge or not, but despite having offices all over the world, there's something like 1,600 Riot employees based in Los Angeles alone. Some of those will no doubt be working on future games. Riot aren't shy about the fact that there will eventually be a game number 2 and number 3. Many of them are responsible for the LCS, the League of Legends Championship Series, and the North American studio for that is actually just across the road from Riot's HQ itself, which is confusing when you're trying to figure out where to meet someone that's going to show you around the place, just FYI. And the rest of the 1,600, well, the rest do many different things. Obviously there's the designers, the community team, the translators, the artists, the support staff, the people you generally expect, but then there's also an in-house documentary crew. A couple of guys that call themselves Riot Records who bring in music artists and then create albums which are released to the community free of charge. Riot produce their own show that breaks down patch notes featuring designers, pro players, shoutcasters. They've hired Warhammer novelists and writers to help rewrite the fiction. They've poached big name game developers from other companies. You remember Greg Street from earlier on? Well, he used to be one of the top guys on World of Warcraft, and now he's the lead designer for League of Legends. Whilst we're talking about Blizzard, if you run a search on LinkedIn for current company, Riot Games, past company, Blizzard Entertainment, it brings up 93 results. Actually, if you want to get a real good sense for just how big this team has become, check out their jobs page. They're looking to hire at least this many people right now. Bear in mind that when League of Legends first launched, they had somewhere around 40 full-time staff. Now, I started this video by asking how Riot Games have managed to fend off the likes of Valve and Blizzard even within the MOBA genre, but in all honesty, I suspect that hasn't even been a genuine concern for quite some time. League of Legends is just so big. It has so many resources behind it, and as we've already said, you've got to convince players to leave a game they've already spent hundreds upon hundreds of hours mastering. League of Legends, I think, will stay the biggest game in the world until it comes up against not another MOBA, but something we haven't even considered yet. A game that comes from a company that acts like Riot Games did back in 2008. They'll get there first, with the right team and the right idea, and they'll want more than just a North American and European audience. And maybe that's Riot's next game. I mean, it could be. It totally could be. Or perhaps maybe it comes from a couple of guys that nobody's heard of yet. They just happen to have spotted the potential in a community-made mod. Thank you so much for watching. This one took quite a bit of work, so if you enjoyed the video, please do give it a like, and here are some of the things that we published which you might also enjoy. I'd recommend the interview of League of Legends champion designer August Browning. I spoke to him just a couple of hours after the official reveal of Jhin, the 129th champion in the League of Legends roster. I think it's worth a watch. Cheers.